mainstream press. That definitely turned around for the protests this weekend. Headline, New York Times, shame. Protesters nationwide rally again to condemn Trump policies. Thousands of demonstrators rallied at hundreds of events on Saturday to speak out against the president's handling of immigration, civil liberties, job cuts, and many other issues. The Times front-paged protest photos and protest signs like these ones, for sale, democracy, and resist, if not now, when, and arrest the kidnappers. Headline, Washington Post, 50-51 protests rally small towns and big cities against Trump policies. Protesters gathered in hundreds of rallies across the country to denounce President Donald Trump. The Washington Post, in its coverage, front-paged a big crowd in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Monument, including this sign front and center, innocent until proven guilty. Headline, the Associated Press, anti-Trump protesters rally in New York, Washington, and elsewhere across the country. Elsewhere is doing a lot of work in that headline, given how many protests there were. But the AP front page, this big banner outside the White House fence, Trump must go now. Next to a sign that says Free Kilmar, for Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Headline, USA Today, nationwide hands-off 50-51 protests against Trump continue for second weekend. They front-paged this upside-down American flag in the foreground, hanging, of course, in a way to signify distress. And then you can see the signs there, No King and Impeach, Remove, Imprison. Headline, CNN, protesters denounce Trump administration in nationwide rallies while supporting impacted communities. Here's the Boston Globe. No kings. Anti-Trump demonstrations around Boston invoke American Revolution. Here's the BBC. Thousands join anti-Trump protests across U.S. Front paging. This is a good sign. I've only ever seen this once. Don't piratize Social Security. That's very well done. Here's The Guardian, which is also based in Britain. Protesters filled the streets in cities across the U.S. to denounce Trump agenda. Here's Reuters, the news service. Thousands of protesters rally against Trump across United States. Here's Bloomberg. Anti-Trump protesters turn out from New York City to San Francisco, and may I suggest, everywhere in between. Here's CBS News. Anti-Trump rallies held across the U.S. to protest administration's policies. Here's NPR. Protesters unite against Trump in hundreds of rallies across the U.S. No more tariffs on the sign there. Here's the LA Times. Anti-Trump protesters rally again in cities across the country. Impeach and remove being spelled out in bodies on the beach on the front page of the LA Times. This was the lead story on NBC Nightly News on Saturday night. You see the chyron there at the bottom, massive anti-Trump protests across the country.
Tonight, protests across the country, from Denver to Midtown Manhattan, to right outside the White House, people voicing anger at the Trump administration, including over its recent immigration actions.
I don't know if the mainstream media catching up now to what's been going on in the streets, I don't know if it's a big advance for that movement against Trump or not. But it's at least worth noting that it is starting to happen. It really hadn't been happening before, and it is now. The coverage is now there. That said, judging from the literally hundreds of protest videos and images that we reviewed over the weekend and compiled, my sense is that the momentum is here, and these protests are going to keep happening basically everywhere, regardless of the level of coverage they get, even though they are now getting more coverage. These are hard to put together, but we've done it. Okay, from left to right and then top to bottom, what you're looking at here is, ready? Anti-Trump protests this weekend in Chicago, Minneapolis, Anchorage. There was a whole bunch of protests in Alaska this weekend. We'll talk about that in a second, but that's Anchorage, third from the left in the middle there on the top row. Then Jacksonville, Florida, Buffalo, New York, Atlanta, Philly, Portland, Oregon, Little Rock, Arkansas, Omaha, of course, New York City, massive crowds in New York City, Denver, Houston, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Ohio, Salt Lake City, Boise, Idaho, Hartford, Connecticut, and then the last two there, Indianapolis and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I paused there on Anchorage because they really did have a very big crowd in Anchorage this weekend. Thousands of people turned out in Anchorage. And you see some of the signs there, quite good. Due process is a right, not a privilege. There's the big one there up on the right that just says, nope. This is a very good one, actually. It's the only time I've seen this exact phrasing. Only caring about your own rights is exactly how you lose them. That's very good. Orange sign just to the right of that. Nixon and McCarthy weren't this bad. I agree. You may also see another one on the left there that's specific to where this is. Dan and Nick stand up for the rule of law. That's about Republican Senator Dan Sullivan and Republican Congressman Nick Begich, both of whom have been very pro-Trump, even as Alaska's other Republican representative in Congress, Senator Lisa Murkowski, has mildly criticized him. But Dan and Nick, hey, stand up. And I just want to say, for whatever reason, it wasn't just the big turnout they got in Anchorage. There were a ton of protests all over Alaska this time. Gustavus, Alaska, population 600-something. That's a significant portion of the town. There's only 600 people in the town. Soldotna, Alaska, all along the main drag there, people outside the auto zone. Bethel, Alaska, it was really cold and rainy, but people turned out in Bethel, Alaska. Look at the turnout in Fairbanks, Alaska. Fairbanks had tons of people turn out this weekend. At Noem, Alaska, N-O-M-E, Noem, protesters posted up there again at the marker for the end of the Iditarod sled dog race. You see the sign there, stop disappearing people. A lot of signs along those lines. In protests we saw everywhere all over the country. Kodiak, Alaska, another good turnout there. Lots of American flags. United we stand, divided we fall. Beautiful Kodiak, Alaska. This was Homer, Alaska. Homer Head Start, 32 years. Keep it going. As Trump says, of course, he wants to eliminate the entire Head Start program everywhere in the country. Literally, I mean, was there a single town in Alaska that didn't protest this weekend? I watched local news reports in Alaska. There were protests on Saturday, all simultaneously in Juneau, Seward, Wasilla, Anchorage, Gustavus, Soldotna, Bethel, Fairbanks, Nome, Kodiak, Homer. I might have even missed some. Oh, Petersburg, Alaska as well. Petersburg's super cute. They call it Little Norway. They turned out to protest in Petersburg, Alaska against Trump this weekend. Hey, Elon, Mars beckons. And that's just a snapshot of one state. That's just Alaska. That was kind of on fuego this weekend. But, you know, if you want to generalize, I think, about how the protests against Trump are evolving now that we're 90 whatever days in, I would say that the media is now covering these protests more and more. And I think that's part because there's a lot of them and they're big. I think it's also maybe because the media is realizing that Trump is only getting less and less popular with each passing day in each new poll. This protest movement to the media, I think, seems like a tangible way to see and describe and report on that. In terms of other changes and evolutions in the anti-Trump movement, I would say for this weekend in particular, one other change we saw is that in a lot of places, people added food drives and clothing drives and other really practical efforts to build donations for food pantries and other local resources that have been hit so hard by Trump's cuts. And those food drives happened alongside the marches and rallies, which is really constructive. I would also say in general that we are, if you want a generalized perception of what's going on in terms of how this movement is changing, I would say we're seeing more protests in red states and in Republican areas of blue or purple states. I mean, that's my impression from looking at all the footage that I have looked at from this weekend's events. Here's some more. Here's Amarillo, Texas this weekend. Here's the big turnout they got in Atlanta, Georgia this weekend. Tons of people turned out in Atlanta. Really big turnout in Boise, Idaho. Boise again and again and again has been turning out huge numbers of people in Idaho. Here's Carson City, Nevada. Look how many people turned out in Carson City, including outside the state legislature building there. Carson City, of course, the capital. Thousands of people turned out to protest in Chicago once again. Chicago definitely showing up. Here's Clarksburg, West Virginia, outside the Harrison County Courthouse. Here's Cincinnati on the left side of your screen. Here's Columbus on the right side of your screen. Ohio has been turning out a lot of anti-Trump protests throughout this past 90 days. This weekend was no exception in Ohio. Here's Michigan. Here's Detroit on the left side of your screen and Grand Rapids on the right side of your screen. Michigan, like Ohio, has been turning out lots and lots of Trump protests with big crowds. This was Saturday in Detroit and in Grand Rapids. There was big crowd protesting in Denver this weekend, yet again. Denver, Colorado. Also, Fargo, North Dakota turned up this weekend. People along the main drag there in Fargo. Concord, Massachusetts, they celebrated the 250th anniversary on Saturday of the first battle of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The anti-tyranny, no kings theme dovetailed very well between the commemoration of the American Revolution and the many people who turned out there to protest against Trump at the same time. Let's do a few more of these. This is left to right, top to bottom. That's Huntersville, North Carolina. Really big, impressive turnout in Los Angeles. Morgantown, West Virginia, where they have been hit very hard by Trump destroying federal offices and agencies. Lower left, that's Mobile, Alabama. Lower center, that's New Haven, Connecticut. And lower right there, that's Raleigh, North Carolina. They had a really big turnout in Raleigh. Look at that crowd. Here's another group. Upper left, that's West Caldwell, New Jersey. Upper center, that's Portland, Maine. On the right, on the top, that's Newton, New Jersey. Lower left, that's Westmont, Illinois. Mesa, Arizona in the center on the bottom there. And beautiful Livingston, Montana on the lower right. We saw big protests this weekend in Greenville, South Carolina, and in Springfield, Ohio, which you will remember, that's where Donald Trump and J.D. Vance attacked Haitian immigrants in perverse terms. Lots of protesters out in San Diego, California. New Orleans, people turned out in the French Quarter to protest. We say no to deportations, protect immigrant rights. Sacramento, California, a big turnout in their Trump protest this weekend. Norwalk, Connecticut. Surprise, Arizona. Topeka, Kansas. Here's just a couple more. Look at the big crowd in Topeka. This was Rock Hill, South Carolina. The Easter Bunny says, hop away from fascism. No more rotten eggs in the White House. Here's a look at St. Paul, Minnesota, where they turned out just a look at this, very, very large crowd of people to protest against Trump this weekend. Again, in St. Paul. They keep doing this. And I could go on and on and on for a very long time with this. The first 50-51 protests, and again, 50-51 stands for 50 protests in 50 states on one day. The first one that they held was in February. It was mostly at state capitals. They actually had more than 50 protests that day, but less than 100. Now, in April, in the same month, we had one day with over 1,000 simultaneous protests, another one this weekend with over 900 simultaneous protests. I mean, some of these protests this week, this month, we've seen tens of thousands of people, a few that topped 100,000 people. It sounds like the next one of these is not going to be on a Saturday. It's going to be on May Day, on Thursday, May 1st. We shall see. But again, I think in general, what we are seeing is that more of the media is figuring out that this is quite a thing. This is not business as usual. This is quite a thing that is happening over and over again at state capitals and on overpasses and on town squares and on street corners and in all sorts of unexpected places, including the reddest of red states. My sense is that as Trump's poll numbers continue to drop, not only are the protests going to grow and spread, but they're going to get more and more attention as well as the dominant news narrative in the country becomes not just what it has been, which is the failures and mistakes and scandals of the administration, the damage Trump is doing. But I think the dominant narrative in the country is becoming not just that disastrous behavior by Trump, but also the country saying no to him and resisting him more and more and more all the time. And that's not just a vibe or a feeling. That is a granular thing that is happening with these protests that we are seeing all over the frickin' country over and over and over again. And on the issues, on education tonight, Harvard University has launched its legal counteroffensive against the Trump administration. Harvard tonight bringing a lawsuit against the Trump administration for the way Trump has targeted and essentially tried to take over Harvard. That counteroffensive from Harvard comes as faculty at the University of Michigan and the University of Washington have both just voted that those universities should join a mutual academic defense compact with other similarly situated universities so they can all band together to defend themselves as a group when Trump inevitably comes for those institutions as well. The financial markets continue to just reject and repel Trump like he is a magnet turned around the wrong way. Here's part of the lead story at the Wall Street Journal tonight. Quote, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped around 972 points today and is on pace for its worst April since 1932. The dollar hit fresh multi-year lows against the euro and other major currencies. Yields on long-term treasuries, which rise when bond prices fall, climbed. When treasury yields climb, that's bad. Oil prices slid, gold rose to a record. Trump's renewed threats to Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's job marked a new source of uncertainty for investors who said eroding confidence in the independence of the U.S. central bank could deal a significant blow to the value of stocks, bonds, and the dollar. While Trump made similar threats against the Fed in his prior term, investors now worry that tariffs could rekindle pandemic-era inflation, requiring the central bank to keep rates higher, not lower. Some worry that recent declines in stocks, bonds, and the dollar, which has become known as the Sell America trade, point to a shift in capital flows that undermines the U.S.'s long-standing primacy in global markets. In other words, Donald Trump is not just tanking the financial markets, he's potentially destroying America's economic status in an irreversible way. The other headlines on the right-wing pages of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page right now also sort of tell the story right now. Quote, America gets Trump fatigue. This was actually from a few days ago. It's still posted prominently at the opinion page website. America gets Trump fatigue. Also, is Trump a tyrant or a savior? Maybe just a bumbler. That counts as good news for Trump right now in the financial press. The Wall Street Journal also warning that Trump now appears to be possessed of economic plans that are, quote, an even dumber idea than tariffs. That's what the way they put it in the headline. Amid the markets just rejecting everything Trump is doing and sloshing into the muddy depths again today, the automobile company that is owned by the president's top campaign donor, that's doing particularly poorly, even against a market that itself is doing very poorly. Here's the Journal again tonight. Quote, the past few months have been particularly punishing for Tesla, which fell about 5.8% today. Tesla's shares have plummeted 44% in 2025 so far. Today, Tesla dropped outside the largest 10 U.S. companies by market value for the first time since June 2024. Tesla is grappling with slower sales and a damaged brand, with Chief Executive Elon Musk's prominent role in the Trump administration alienating some customers. The company is set to report earnings tomorrow, Tuesday. Analysts are expecting a year-over-year drop in Tesla profits. The Washington Post reports that Elon Musk may be heading toward the end of his time in Washington. That first corner earnings report that his car company is due to give tomorrow, it does look like it's not going to be good, and that may give him a business excuse that he might be looking for to get out of Washington. After all, his time in Washington kind of started bad and has just been scuttling worse and worse all the time. His Department of Government Efficiency Doge thing is a mix of embarrassment for its errors and its palpable confusion, and horror and anger for how much damage it is doing to the U.S. government, with really nothing positive to show for itself at all. Even if the whole idea of Doge was cutting spending, the Trump administration is spending more on a daily basis than the Biden administration was. So even if the whole good idea of Doge is less government spending, it has absolutely failed at that, with Trump spending more than Biden did. Musk's cocky assertions about 150-year-olds getting Social Security were immediately debunked and showed him to just not understand the data he was looking at, which is very embarrassing for a man whose whole brand is, look how smart I am. Musk's time in Washington has been marked by White House officials snarking anonymously to the press, like Rolling Stone magazine, about the perception by some in the White House that Mr. Musk appears to be high all the time. Also, that he's possibly the most annoying person on the planet. I keep using the word annoying, but the word doesn't do the situation justice. Musk apparently tried to get a top secret briefing from the Pentagon on China war plans. That was promptly reported in the New York Times, which led President Trump to show that he was both absolutely unaware that his top campaign donor had arranged this for himself. Trump then very very quickly made clear that he didn't think something like that should happen. And so it was canceled, and Elon had to eat that too. Musk then tried to get back into the money and politics game where he'd done so well, getting Trump into the White House in the first place. He went very publicly all in with massive spending, ostentatious spending, and personal appearances to try to sway the Wisconsin State Supreme Court election. Elon Musk's candidate then lost by double digits in an election that was universally branded as a referendum on Elon Musk. Musk then installed his own choice as acting IRS commissioner. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent then complained to Trump and uninstalled the guy 2 days later. Musk then took a loud public stance against Donald Trump's tariffs. Trump has ignored his loud public stance against them and kept the tariffs and all their disastrous implications, including for Musk's own car company. Musk then started a loud public beef with Trump advisor Peter Navarro. Trump decided, quite obviously, to keep Peter Navarro, and we haven't heard much from Elon Musk ever since. Now, the Washington Post reports this weekend that Elon Musk's signature move in Washington, that whole "tell me 5 things you did last week or you'll be fired" government email, that email goes out sometimes weekly now to government employees, but people just ignore it. It's being ignored by multiple, if not most, agencies in the government because Elon Musk no longer really seems to have the juice to do anything about it. Musk no longer appears to be running stuff, let alone personally wielding some kind of axe over every government employee in every government agency. All of that on top of the massive public revulsion at his role in Donald Trump's administration and in American politics. The massive public revulsion for Elon Musk's role in Washington has made the Tesla brand toxic, not to mention his own personal brand. So we'll see tomorrow how things go on that Tesla first quarter earnings call. We'll see how it goes for Tesla. We'll see how it goes in terms of telling us what's about to happen to Elon Musk and his sojourn in Washington. We've got more ahead tonight on the meltdown at the Pentagon, the disputed report today that Pete Hegseth is on his way out at the Pentagon, and the panicked pushback from Hegseth himself, from the Pentagon, and now from the White House. We've also got the latest on the Trump administration turning around buses while they were apparently driving more men to the airport to apparently take yet more of them to El Salvador. We'll talk with the attorney tonight who appears to have caused those buses to turn around. 1 if by land, 2 if by D.C. I see you, Huntington, West Virginia. I see you everywhere. I've got so much to get to tonight. Stay with us. Secretaries of defense in this country, and lots of those defense secretaries have had lots of scandals over the years. You know, we've had good defense secretaries, we've had bad ones, we've had some real bad ones. But you know, there's always room for something new under the sun. For all the things that defense secretaries in the United States have ever done wrong, I'm not sure we've ever had a Secretary of Defense rope his spouse into a sensitive national security conversations. I feel like of all the things we've seen at the Pentagon, this might count as a new problem. The Wall Street Journal reported last month that Trump's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, quote, brought his wife, a former Fox News producer, to 2 meetings with foreign military counterparts where sensitive information was discussed, including the Ukraine Defense Contact Group at NATO and one very delicate meeting with the British Defense Secretary. Why did he need to bring his wife to those meetings? Don't know. But now there is new reporting in the New York Times that Secretary Hegseth also allegedly shared detailed information about forthcoming military strikes with his wife on a group chat on the messaging app Signal. 2 sources have now confirmed that for NBC News. And yes, this is the second Signal group chat we know of featuring sensitive military information that Pete Hegseth has been involved in. The first one, Hegseth was included on after it was started by Trump National Security Advisor Michael Waltz. You might remember he inexplicably also included a reporter in that chat. This second one was reportedly started by Hegseth himself and included a whole bunch of people who would not seem to have any clearance, let alone any need to know about the details of an imminent military strike. Sources telling the Times that what Hegseth shared with his wife in this second group chat was essentially the same attack plans that were shared in the first Signal chat on the same day. including precise flight schedules for U.S. Air Force jets that were about to launch a strike in Yemen. Again, Secretary Hegseth's wife is a former Fox News producer who does not work for the Defense Department or any other part of the U.S. government, which is fine. Nothing against Mrs. Hegseth here. I'm sure she's great. But one does struggle to imagine a compelling reason why she, as the Defense Secretary's wife, would need to know the specific timing of U.S. bombings in Yemen that were about to start. And obviously, there's the question of why sensitive information about military attack plans would be shared with anybody, by anybody, on a group chat on a commercial non-government messaging app. In response to this latest reporting, a Pentagon spokesman didn't deny the existence of Hegseth's second signal chat with his wife and others. The spokesperson claimed only that there was no classified information on any signal chat. Okay. Like I said, we've had good defense secretaries and bad ones, but I'm not sure we've ever had one pile up the headlines quite like this guy. There really does appear to be expanding chaos at Pete Hegseth's Pentagon. His chief of staff is leaving his post. 3 other top officials were fired on Friday, though the 3 men then said in an unusual joint statement that they have no idea why they were fired. The Pentagon's former top spokesman resigned last week. He published an opinion piece this weekend in which he said, quote, "The last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon. It is becoming a real problem for the administration." Today, the Trump administration is denying reporting from NPR that the White House has begun the process of looking for a new defense secretary to replace the embattled Pete Hegseth. Mr. Hegseth was confirmed to his post by the narrowest Senate vote of any defense secretary ever. He has since spent his time in office seeming to prove his most trenchant critics correct. Joining us now is Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. He is the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. He wrote this today, quote, he said, "Secretary of Defense is too critical of a role to be done by someone this incompetent. It is past time for Hegseth to resign or be fired." Senator Warner, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
Is this a cumulative effect in terms of Mr. Hegseth's tenure in office that led to you today calling for his resignation, or is it something specific about these latest revelations?
Well, Rachel, you didn't even give the full story on this latest revelation. It was not only his wife, but his brother, who's been put in a cushy job at the Pentagon, his personal lawyer, who's been put in. This is a reflection of the kind of nepotism that spreads all across this Trump administration. We've had 2 reports now. Anybody who follows the intelligence community or the defense community would know if a normal military officer or CIA officer had let this information out while our jets were flying to hit the Houthis, they would be fired immediately. And what I'd like Pete Hegseth to do is I want him to go down to Naval Station Norfolk, which is the home port of the aircraft carrier Truman. The Truman is the aircraft carrier in the Eastern Med where these jets were launched from. And I want him to talk to the men and women who know people on the Truman, explain that this was not classified, that if this information had gotten out, they know their loved ones would have been potentially taken down by the Houthis' defense. The arrogance of this crowd and the incompetence is breathtaking, and it is costing not only morale in the DOD, morale in the intelligence community, and making all our friends and allies across the world say, man, we can't trust this crowd with any kind of classified information.
We are also now seeing officials who are close to Mr. Hegseth, people who are operating in political appointed positions at the top echelons of the Pentagon, who are all now being sort of flung out. Do you have any insight into what's going on at the top ranks there? By my count, at least 5 top officials have resigned or been transferred or been fired just in the last few days with very little explanation as to why. And some of those people who have been fired or removed saying they themselves don't know why they've been taken out.
I think some of the folks were probably actually competent, but this guy is so far beyond his skis, so far beyond the ability to manage, frankly, what's the biggest operation in our whole government. And it's we all who opposed him knew this was coming. We shouldn't be surprised. But when you put somebody of this incompetence at this level, and then his careless treatment of classified information, and again, going back to this most recent exposure on the Signal chat, the fact that he's got not just his wife, but a brother and his personal lawyer, that is not the way the Defense Department operates. This is beyond the pale, and what I worry about is how many other good people that serve to keep our nation safe are going to say, we can't follow this guy. So I do hope that he would, I don't expect the honorable thing, he would quit. And I'm not sure that Mr. Trump will ever hold anybody accountable. But what's remarkable as well, Rachel, is we don't know, have any of these folks who were on this chat, have any of them had their phones checked for malware put on? The bad guys, if they follow one of these conversations, can put malware on your phone without holding your phone. This is basic cybersecurity and Intel 101, and these folks have got no notion or any kind of understanding of how important this information is.
You know, Senator Warner, the first revelation about the first Signal group chat about those war plans, I think, shocked people, legitimately, even people who didn't have high expectations for the competence of this administration. It resonated deeply with the public. We know that in part from public polling on the subject, where people overwhelmingly said that people should have been fired over that, and they thought that it was overwhelmingly very serious, despite the fact that we at the White House and the Hegseth crowd sort of pushing back and saying it was no big deal. Now that there has been a second revelation of yet another instance like this, I wonder if we're approaching a point where some of your Republican colleagues in the Senate might join with you and in a bipartisan way, might approach the White House, might say, listen, this was a narrow confirmation. A lot of us had doubts about him. Our doubts are being proven correct. This is the guy you need to move out of here.
Rachel, you got it. I mean, we've always felt the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, we've always been prided ourselves on being bipartisan. Will any of my Republican friends find their voice and say, this is a bridge too far? When we are deteriorating, putting our armed forces in harm's way potentially, when we're pissing off all our allies, when we're undermining the confidence of the men and women who serve in our armed forces or in the intelligence community, what will be finally the breaking point? I hope and pray this is it, because we are making our country less safe every day this guy stays in that office.
Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. Sir, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man right now, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, we got much more news ahead here tonight. Stay with us. Busy night.
We're here because we believe that the rule of law should be followed by everyone, including the President of the United States. And we're in a situation where the administration has sent someone here to El Salvador by mistake, admitted to it. A Supreme Court decision has come down to say you need to facilitate the return of this man back to the United States so he can go through due process. And the administration is saying, no, we're not going to do it. We got to be clear. This isn't just about him. This is also about every single person in the United States. The Constitution applies to all people in our country. Due process applies to all people in our country. It's one of the things that sets our country apart from other places across the entire world.
Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen was the first, but he was just the start. 4 more members of Congress went to El Salvador today, including Democrats Maxwell Frost, who you saw speaking there, Robert Garcia, Maxine Dexter, and Yasemin Ansari, all to demand the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man the Trump administration sent to a mega prison in that country without any due process. In court, the administration admitted that sending him to that prison was what they called an administrative error. But it's not just him. The Trump administration has sent hundreds of people to that prison with little to no due process. The legal battle over that policy took a significant turn over the weekend. You might remember Friday Night Show, we talked about early reports that the Trump administration might have been trying to send a whole new group of people to El Salvador from the Bluebonnet Detention Center in Anson, Texas. On Friday night, we got in this footage of a bus full of people leaving that immigration prison in Texas, bound for parts unknown. Well, NBC News now reports there were as many as 28 people on that bus, most of them men from Venezuela. NBC News also now reporting that some of them on board were told they were being deported to El Salvador. Now, we showed you that video of that bus leaving the Bluebonnet Detention Center in Anson, Texas. But we didn't show you what happened next. What happened next is pretty remarkable. This is footage taken by NBC News of that bus getting on the highway, heading toward an airport in North Texas. There's a caravan of about 15 law enforcement vehicles traveling with the bus. But the bus and that huge caravan of law enforcement passes the exit for the airport. They drive past it. They abruptly turn around and looped back and came back to where they started, came back to the detention center in Anson. Now, we do not know exactly why that bus and that huge caravan abruptly drove to the airport, drove past it, turned around, and came back. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security would not comment to NBC News about why the bus was turned around, but it may have something to do with Herculean efforts made by the ACLU, and specifically by the ACLU's Lee Gallant, who's one of the lawyers who is leading the legal fight against these deportations and against this policy of shipping people to a foreign forever prison. That night, as that bus was leaving that prison in Texas, it was Lee Gallant and his team who rushed to 3 separate courts within 5 hours to try to stop yet another group of people from being sent by Donald Trump to El Salvador, presumably with no way back, and potentially including the people on that bus. Again, 3 different courts in 5 hours to try to stop this from happening. Among other things that led to this extraordinary order from the United States Supreme Court issued in the dead of night at 1 a.m. Eastern Time, Friday night/Saturday morning. Quote, the government is directed not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court. In other words, by direct order of the United States Supreme Court, using clearer language this time, the Trump administration has been told they cannot send people out of the country on flights like this until the Supreme Court can weigh in further. 7 Supreme Court justices signed on to that decision. Thomas and Alito dissented. But the ACLU lawyer whose swift action led to that bus turning around, we believe, led to that dramatic decision of the Supreme Court, he joins us here next to talk about what's coming next. Stay with us.
Colocaron a firmar una orden de detención y de deportación a un país que no sabemos y pues simplemente estamos siendo juzgados injustamente por nuestros tatuajes y pues los oficiales de ahí haciendo abuso autoritario por simplemente los 100 días de liberación que tiene Trump.
I was made to sign a detention and deportation order to a country we don't even know. That's a piece of video NBC News obtained from the family of one man the Trump administration almost flew out of the country this weekend, we think, before an emergency order from the United States Supreme Court appears to have stopped them. The Supreme Court was able to intervene in this case because of swift action from the ACLU and their lead attorney on this matter, Lee Gallant. Lee and his team rushed to 3 separate federal courts within 5 hours on Friday night to try to stop the Trump administration from sending yet another group of men out of the country and presumably to that mega prison in El Salvador. Joining us now is Lee Gallant, Deputy Director of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project. Mr. Gallant, thank you for joining us again. I appreciate you being here. So, Lee, is this what it appears? Were they about to send more men to El Salvador on Friday, but that was stopped because of you and your team rushing to those 3 separate courts on Friday afternoon and evening?
Yeah, sorry, Rachel. I'm having trouble with the computer. Yeah, they were in real danger, absolutely real danger. We had been hearing the night before that they were getting these notices and that they would be removed that night or the next day. And then we found out they were on buses, so we did what we could do. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court stepped in. What was remarkable is that the government had been going around the country saying, we get that the Supreme Court said we have to give notice and we will give reasonable notice. I think we were even shocked that it turned out that the government was giving them notice 12 to 24 hours in advance, unrepresented people, a form only in English that did not tell them they had a right to contest what was happening, much less how long they had to do it or how to do it. Under no conceivable understanding of what the Supreme Court said when it said these individuals are entitled to due process and notice, was this sufficient? I don't. The administration is just going about trying to evade judicial review in any way they can, notwithstanding even Supreme Court rulings.
And to be clear, I mean, for anybody watching who's not a lawyer and who doesn't necessarily understand what due process means in this case in detail, the basic concept of it is very simple, right? The basic concept, as I understand it, is that the Trump administration is saying, we claim the right to send these men to an out-of-country prison from which they may never, ever leave. And we do that on the basis of our assessment that these guys are terrible gang members, members of a particularly terrible gang, and that's why we think we can do this. The notice that the Supreme Court has said these men must get is notice to give them enough time to say, hey, I'm not a gang member like that. I'm not one of these people who's part of this class that you claim the right to treat this way. And so the substance of what they're being, how they're being noticed, how they're being given advance word that this stuff is going to happen really matters, because it's the only chance they may ever have to protect themselves from what will otherwise be lawless imprisonment, potentially for life.
You're absolutely right, Rachel. I mean, the one core part of due process is you will get notice of what the government's trying to do to you and the ability to contest it. And the Supreme Court was really clear on April 7th, the first time this issue was up there. It said the notice must be sufficient to actually, the Supreme Court put in the word actually get into court to contest what's happening. At this point, these are just unilateral allegations by our government that you should spend the rest of your life potentially in a foreign prison. These are Venezuelans being sent to El Salvador potentially for the rest of their lives and not having the ability to contest what's going on. The United States government, if they feel like what they're doing is lawful, should have no problem putting it before a court and letting a court decide. Yet every single chance they get, they're trying to evade judicial review. We are filing all over the country because they will never tell us who they're going to try and do this to or give advance notice, in complete defiance of what the Supreme Court has said.
Lee, I spent the weekend and today looking through protest footage of people protesting in all 50 states in the country. There was not a single protest that I looked at, even the little tiny ones, even in the most remote places in this country, where people were not talking about this case and not talking about due process and the need to not disappear people and the unjustness of our administration sending people to some prison in El Salvador. I know that you're in the trenches of this working every day, but the country is paying a lot of attention to what you're doing. It really matters to people.
Well, that's great. And because, you know, one of the things that I think is now starting to resonate with people is they say, well, I'm not a gang member, I can't be sent. But if there's no due process and they pick you up and you have no chance to contest it, then anybody literally can end up for the rest of their life in El Salvador. And I think that's why due process is so important for everyone. Everyone needs to be paying attention to the Trump administration eliminating basic bedrocks that have been a part of this country for over 200 years.
Legal alert from the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project. Thank you, Lee. We'll be right back.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right, that does it for me for now. I'll see you again tomorrow and every night this week at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now it's time for The Last Word with the great Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. And I have to say, Attorney Lee Gellert, who you just had on, every time you bring him on, I usually am able to catch exactly what he has to say, and I learn something every time. His complete command of this immigration law and this situation is so important, and the work he's doing is unique now in our history. He's doing things that no lawyer in our history has ever had to do.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, we've all had to become sort of jailhouse lawyers and learn a lot about the legal system because of Trump's 2 terms in office, because, well, for obvious reasons. But Lee is one of the lawyers who is both like where the rubber hits the road, in the sense that he is there in court. He is the lead lawyer. He is litigating. He is there doing the actual work. He is writing the briefs. And he is also able to explain to a lay audience what he's doing and the importance of it. Like, it's very hard to find somebody who's at the actual tip of the spear in constitutional issues like that, who also can explain it in ways that non-lawyers understand. And it's really valuable. The ACLU is really lucky to have him. And in a case like this, we as a country are really lucky to have the ACLU.
Yeah, it really is. And another thing that non-lawyers can understand is the Harvard lawsuit today that they filed in federal court in Boston. It is a thing of beauty. You do not have to go to college or law school to understand it. But Harvard law professor, constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe is going to join us to add his voice to explain what's going on in that case.
Right on. Lots going on. Thanks, Lawrence.
Right. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. In 1932, the unemployment rate in this country was 23.6%. Let me say that again. The unemployment rate in 1932 was 23.6%. We were at the depth of what came to be known as the Great Depression, the cruelest economic depression in American history. Starving children were going to bed hungry in this country in 1932. The suicide rate was skyrocketing. And today, the Trump stock market is on its way, according to the Wall Street Journal, to the, quote, worst April since 1932. Prior to the Donald Trump stock market, not a single economic indicator in this country has ever resembled anything in 1932 during the entire course of our lifetimes. But now Donald Trump has managed to bring the stock market back to 1932. The difference between 1932 and today is that in 1932, the only hope, and I mean the only hope, that people had in this country came from the newly elected President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was working every day then to lead the country out of that depression, which is exactly what he did. Every president in our lifetimes has always known every minute of the day how to instantaneously crash the stock market. They've all known how to do it, and not one of them has chosen to do that until Donald Trump. Every president always knew that all he had to do to crash the stock market was to take a public swipe at the chair of the Federal Reserve, who has always been, no matter who it is, more popular with Wall Street than any president of the United States. So for better or worse, Wall Street always respects the Federal Reserve chair much more than they respect the President of the United States. And now that respect gap is bigger than ever. And so Donald Trump decided that once again today, he would publicly attack Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, who was appointed to that job by Donald Trump in his first term, and then was reappointed by President Biden. That's right. President Biden reappointed Republican Jerome Powell, who was originally put into that position by Republican Donald Trump. And so the guy who says he always chooses the best people is now attacking one of his best people and crashing the stock market every single time that he does it. No president has ever been stupid enough to do that until Donald Trump. At 9:41 a.m., Donald Trump decided to go on social media and predict a recession, which no president has ever done. No president has ever predicted a recession during their term. So Donald Trump predicted a recession, and then he blamed it on the Federal Reserve chair, saying there can be a slowing of the economy, otherwise known as a recession, unless Mr. Too Late, a major loser, lowers interest rates, N-O-W, capital letters. Now, all those Trump voters who believed Donald Trump was going to make the American economy better all by himself, all of them thought that he was able to do that, and they never once on the campaign trail heard Donald Trump say he could only make the economy great if the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates. Never mentioned that on the campaign trail, but now Donald Trump says, the only I can fix it guy, I can't fix anything unless the chair of the Federal Reserve fixes it for me. That's what he's saying now. Speculation today then ran wild that Donald Trump would try to fire the chair of the Federal Reserve, which is against the law. CNBC's coverage of the market today once again turned dark.
This is what you get. I mean, somebody needs to turn to the camera and tell the president to stop. I mean, he is messing with the foundation of this country. He's messing with the foundation of the economy. He's messing with America's place in the global financial system.
It is against the law for the president to fire the chair of the Federal Reserve, and Jerome Powell has said under no circumstances would he quit if threatened by Donald Trump with firing. But having seen Donald Trump defy the law in other arenas, the stock market is worried to the point that the Wall Street Journal titled its editorial tonight, "The Fire Jerome Powell Market Rout." The Journal editorial says, markets fear Mr. Trump really might fire Mr. Powell, not that it would do the president any good. He'd have to remove more than the chairman to change the Federal Open Market Committee, which sets interest rates and tries to satisfy the central bank's dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices. This is a recipe for more market uncertainty. The tariffs will cause at least a one-time increase in the price of tariffed goods, which may become more entrenched if the Fed accommodates them by cutting rates. Markets are spooked because they don't know if Mr. Trump listens to anyone but his own impulses. Everything you're about to hear is something Donald Trump apparently does not know, and it is this. The chairman of the Federal Reserve does not set interest rates. Nope, he doesn't. Interest rates are established by a majority vote of a Federal Reserve Committee of 12 members. The Wall Street Journal notes Mr. Trump can't fire the regional Fed bank presidents on the committee, and all 12 voting members seem to agree with the Fed's recent policy moves. Even if you don't buy a new car during the Trump years, your automobile costs are going up right now tonight. NBC News is reporting, quote, an extended trade war could cause the average annual cost of car insurance to rise more than $300 by the end of the year, according to estimates from the insurance agency Insurify. I bought a Kia 4 years ago because it was the cheapest car in its category, and now it's in the shop waiting for a part to be shipped from South Korea. It's going to be a lot more expensive than it would have been during the Biden presidency. And while I'm driving a rental car during this very long wait, it turns out, for that highly tariffed part to arrive, this is what I'm hearing.
Starting next week, all vehicle prices go up because of the 25% auto tariff. That means if you're thinking about getting a new or pre-owned Nissan, now is the time. Why wait and pay 25% more? Come to Nissan and Van Nuys today and lock in those pre-tariff pricings before it's too late. Once prices go up, they're not coming back down.
You know, car advertising always delivers the simplest messages. And so these ads now presume that every adult in America understands who actually pays tariffs. There's a whole new car advertising genre now about pre-tariff pricing. Lock in those pre-tariff pricings before it's too late. Now is the time. Why wait and pay 25% more? That is not followed by a Trump campaign ad saying, don't worry, China will pay the tariff. You don't have to worry. Don't worry, South Korea will pay the tariff. Japan will pay the tariff. Germany will pay the tariff. Everyone knows now. everyone knows Donald Trump has been lying every single time he has ever told his voters who pays those tariffs. He always said China pays the tariffs. He always said the foreign countries pays the tariffs. He was lying every time they said it. And now his voters know. Now they know. In April of 1932, when the stock market was falling exactly the way the stock market is falling this April, no one could afford to buy a car in America. No one except the very richest people in America could afford to buy a car in 1932. And so here we are at the Make America 1932 again moment when Donald Trump is turning the stock market into its 1932 performance level right in the middle of the worst depression in our history. That's where we are now. That's where the stock market is, not the economy. Luckily, has not gone to that. But even Donald Trump now is predicting a recession. Donald Trump is making everything in our lives more expensive with his tariffs, as everyone in the country is looking forward to the benefits, for example, of retirement accounts. Every one of them every retirement account now has less money in it than it did when Joe Biden was president.